The view on grief, address, presence, burden. Someone is gone. That sentence has the shape of a fact. A death can be registered. A date can be written down. A body can be buried. A name can be carved into stone, folded into family story, and left there for later hands that do not tremble while touching it. But grief does not behave like a fact. It moves through the ordinary world with an impressive disrespect for categories. The world continues and stands still at the same time. The first question arrives in a simple form and is therefore harder to evade. Will it ever stop hurting? That question asks whether the body will always feel this way, whether the room will always carry that pressure, and whether memory will always be waiting to ambush. The first view, address. Nizar Qabbani was born in Damascus in 1923. He studied law, became a diplomat, and reached many readers through work they first approached as love poetry. Love is often treated as private, as if desire, bodies, and intimacy could be kept outside politics. Qabbani did not accept that border. His clarity could be intimate and accusatory at the same time. Difficult things didn't become simple. They became harder to ignore. His grief cannot be separated from the public violence around him. His son Tawfik died young, and later, in 1981, his wife Balqis al-Rawi was killed in the bombing of the Iraqi embassy in Beirut, where she had been working. The death of Balqis entered Qabbani's work not as a soft recollection, but as an event in which private love and public violence became impossible to separate. The poem that followed the death of Balqis does not begin like private mourning locked in a room. It begins with accusation. Qabbani's address to Balqis is also an address to the world that killed her. The bitter repetition of thank you is not gratitude. It is indictment. When the poem says, "For killing my Balqis," the grief is already public. The beloved is named, but so is the crime. Balqis is not turned into a general symbol and placed at a safe distance. She is still the person spoken to. The poem calls her by name, returns to her, asks after her, and keeps the sentence facing her. Address becomes the form love takes after the answer has been destroyed. The poem does not stay inside the marriage. Beirut enters it. When Qabbani writes that Beirut kills one of us every day, grief becomes larger than the household without leaving the household behind. The murder of Balqis is private enough to break a family and public enough to accuse a political world. Qabbani's grief cannot become quiet acceptance. The poem remembers, pleads, and mourns, but it also charges. The address keeps both together, the wife who was loved and the world that made her death possible. That force is also the cost. Address preserves intimacy, but it keeps the wound open. If the dead remain the one spoken to, grief cannot become only history. Every sentence turns towards someone who can no longer answer. There is tenderness in that, but there is punishment too. To keep speaking is to keep meeting the changed silence. The second view, presence. Birago Diop was born in Dakar in 1906, in what was then French West Africa. He became a veterinarian, a diplomat, a poet, and a storyteller. His literary life is often remembered through his relation to Wolof oral tradition, folk tale, ancestral memory, and the movement of African literary forms into written French. Diop's view of grief is clearest in Breaths. The poem begins with an instruction. Listen more often to things than to beings. That is already a reversal. The mourner is not told to look inward first, or to preserve the dead only through memory. The mourner is told to listen outward. Then the poem begins placing the dead where ordinary perception would not look for them. They are not under the earth. They are in the tree that rustles, the wood that groans, the water that runs, the house, the crowd. Diop does not keep the dead in one sacred location. He distributes them through the world. The repeated claim that the dead are not dead can sound comforting outside of the poem. Inside the text, it is stranger than comfort. It is discipline. The living are being trained to hear relation in things. Presence is not a reunion, but a changed way of attending. Diop's grief is not private in the modern sense. It does not ask one mourner to carry the dead alone inside memory. It gives the dead to the world, and then makes the living responsible for listening. The comfort of that view is obvious, but it should not be treated cheaply. It refuses the brutality of total absence. It gives the living a way to remain in relation without pretending the dead have returned. But the cost is also there. If the dead are everywhere, the actual violence of their absence can blur. The hand cannot be held. The voice cannot answer in the old way. The body is gone, and no amount of listening should be used to pretend that this fact has become gentle. The third view, burden. Gabriela Mistral was born in Chile in 1889. She became a teacher, a poet, a diplomat, and in 1945 the first Latin American writer to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature. Her public image often gathered around motherhood, children, education, tenderness, faith, and moral seriousness. These labels are not false, but they can make Mistral sound softer than she is, and Mistral is everything but soft. Her work carries grief with discipline. It does not decorate sorrow. It bears it. The early sonnets of death do not treat grief as a feeling that can be explained and then released. They place it inside a scene of burial. In the first sonnet, the dead beloved has been put in a frozen niche. The speaker imagines taking him down from that cold place and lowering him into humble, sunlit earth. The movement is strange because it is tender and severe at the same time. The grave becomes something the living speaker wants to arrange, almost care for, as if burial could still be an act of love. In Mistral's burden, the dead body is gone from life, but not gone from responsibility. The speaker does not simply remember him. She handles the place of his rest. She imagines the earth becoming soft around him, almost like a cradle. Maternal tenderness enters the poem, but it does not make the scene gentle. Love continues as care for someone who can no longer receive care in the old way. Later, the death of Juan Miguel, whom Mistral had raised with a mother's attachment, deepened that older pattern of grief into something even more severe. With Mistral, grief does not stay inside one event. It becomes a way that weight is carried through life. Her grief is burden. Modern speech has become very committed to making every heavy thing sound removable. Burden suggests weight, obligation, a load, something one is supposed to put down. But for Mistral, burden is not merely damage. It is seriousness. Some losses cannot be translated into comfort without lying about them. Some sorrow cannot be softened without being falsified. Some grief does not remain as conversation with the dead, and it does not become a warm continuity in the world. It becomes something the living must carry, and the question is not whether the weight disappears, but whether it can be given form. The dead remain as burden because love has consequences after death. A person who mattered does not simply vanish from the structure of the living. They leave duties, unfinished tenderness, unanswered care, and a shape that cannot be returned to them. Mistral gives that burden form. And here again, the form has a cost. Burden preserves the seriousness of grief, but a carried burden can become a life sentence. The dignity of endurance can harden into refusal of relief. The form can protect sorrow from triviality, but it can also bind the living to carrying as the only faithful posture. Overview. So, will it ever stop hurting? These are three views, not three solutions. Solutions belong to problems that can be fixed. Grief is not an object, but a changed relation, and each of these writers gives that relation a different form. Address saves intimacy. Presence saves continuity. Burden saves seriousness. None of them saves everything, and that is why they belong together. Each looks at the same wound and refuses a different lie. Address refuses the lie that the dead are no longer spoken to. Presence refuses the lie that the dead are nowhere. Burden refuses the lie that grief must become light in order to become bearable. Taken together, they do not answer grief. Some grief stops hurting by no longer being the first thing in the morning and the last thing at night. It stops breaking every ordinary object in the room. It no longer arrives with the same violence, at the same hour, with the same appetite. The living person changes around it, not because the loss becomes smaller, but because life keeps adding hours around the wound. Maybe grief doesn't end because love doesn't know how to become nothing. Maybe that is too much comfort. Maybe it is not comfort at all. The question remains where it began. When someone is gone, what remains is not one thing. It may be address, it may be presence, it may be burden, and sometimes it is the silence between them.